Three custom firmwares for the PS3 have just dropped. Big name ones like 484 Starbug by Habib, 484 Rebug Light Edition, and 484 Ferrix Cobra, and all of them released within 24 hours of each other. Today is March 3rd, 2019. This is KM Zoilus. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It keeps me motivated to keep bringing you content like this, as well as various tutorials and whatnot. Later on this week, we will be picking up with the Retro Arch tutorials, but hopefully I'm probably going to release 1 or 2 videos about other stuff before then. So make sure you stay tuned. This is not a tutorial. In this video today, we are just going to be covering very quickly some of the basics of these 3 custom firmwares. Maybe if there's one you should be using over the other, some of the pros and cons. And in 2019, those of you who are using DEX, should you still be using DEX? What are the benefits of using a console on DEX as opposed to one of these more updated firmwares, which are all CEX? And so, yeah, we're not going to dive too deep into that, but hopefully you'll find it kind of interesting. And then at the end of the video, for those of you who are newer to the scene or still might have some type of little bit of confusion here and there, although again, it's not a tutorial, I will give you some hints and some pointers as to how you should go about installing these, and maybe some of the do's and don'ts. That way your installation can go a little bit smoother, or at least as smooth as possible. Anyway, let's go ahead and let's get started. And I'm going to kick it off by letting you all know that these firmwares are all CEX firmwares. There is no DEX here. I haven't seen or heard anything about DEX for 484. We'll see if one comes out. If it does, great. If not, well then, we won't see it. But the way it works is that, and Team Rebug has stated this before, these developers, they just don't make a DEX from thin air. They actually have to wait to get it from a supplier or from like a resource. Once they get the official DEX firmware, then they can work their magic with it, add their special touches, and they can create, like in Rebug's case, they create, the hybrid DEX firmware and all that good stuff. But if they don't get it from their supplier or from their source, then they can't make the DEX. CEX is different because it's just a modification or a customization of the official retail firmware. That official retail firmware pub is available to everybody. You could download it straight from Sony's site. No big secret. There's even custom firmware, creators out there that allow you to modify those retail pubs, and then you can make your own CEX. So maybe a bigger question is, what do you need in 2019? Do you need one of these CEX, or do you actually need DEX? I could spend a whole day talking about that, but here's the short answer. All right, so pay close attention, guys. If in 2019 you are still running mod menus online with your PS3, then yeah, you probably need to be on DEX because those menus require you to do so. If you're a developer, you also know, without me having to tell you what, of course, the benefits are of being on DEX. But if you're not a developer, and if you're not running these mod menus online, then trust me, CEX will meet all of your needs, and you can use pretty much any one of these and you'll be fine. DEX, and I'm just going to mention this again, the developers used to say this all the time at first, and then they just got tired of saying it because nobody paid attention. DEX was really never meant to be used as an end user type firmware. It was strictly made for developers, for creating, developing, debugging, whatever. It wasn't meant to be used by an end user as like a retail firmware as CEX is. So if you're not a developer, then if you're not running mod menus, then there's really no need to be on DEX. Now, the people who run mod menus will tell you it's the greatest thing since sliced bread because they're running the better mod menus. But aside from that, they normally can tell you not one thing why DEX, quote unquote, is better than CEX. The truth is that when you use it to run mod menus, you are leaving 95 to 98% of the potential of DEX literally wasted, sitting on the table doing nothing. So again, it's really up to you. It's your system, what you want to run. But if you are not running mod menus anymore, you just got tired of the scene or whatever, um, and you're not a developer, run one of these CEX. I mean, you can do everything else. You can get online. You can wipe your history and your syscalls. You can back up games. It's not like backing up games happens faster through DEX. If there's a PS3 game that works in DEX, it's going to work in CEX as well. You can use Webman mod pretty much fully. Same thing with Multiman. Emulators work fine. Everything works. Not only that, but a lot, if not almost all, of the apps and homebrews that come out, when they do, they're at the minimum designed for CEX. Some of them are designed for CEX and DEX, but they will all definitely be designed to work with CEX first, because the developers know that is what you're supposed to be using, and maybe later on in a DEX compatibility will come out with an update. Sometimes it may not, but rest assured that when all these apps come out, they are designed to work with CEX. So it really is up to you, how you want to have your system. But if you don't meet those two criterias, if you're not using these menus, if you're not a developer, then trust me, CEX is fine for you. You're not going to be missing out on anything. All right, and let's move on now to the firmwares themselves. It's just the whole CEX DEX thing is something I've been wanting to, cover, even if it's just really quick, especially this late in the PS3 modding scene. Hopefully, it'll just help you make a better decision as to which way you should go. Anyway, with these three custom firmwares, honestly, guys, you can't go wrong with any of them. But if I had to recommend one above the others, obviously it would be Rebug, only because it's been the gold standard for so long. Also, you can use it to, however degree you want. If you want to use it as a plain Jane vanilla, CEX firmware, you can. You don't have to use all the extra features, but it's nice to know that you have them. When you install this one, make sure you install the toolbox that goes with it, which in this case it's 2.02.17, so you can get the most out of it and make sure that all the features are usable, because it's designed for this specific one. 482 Lite simply means this cannot be converted to DEX. It's strictly CEX only, and there might be one or two features that were meant to be used with DEX that you can't use here. But again, trust me, if you're not doing the whole modding online thing and you're not a developer, you're not going to miss any of that stuff. But there's a lot of extra bells and whistles here. One of the new things that I did notice, though, with this version is that it has Han package support. Now, this is something that's only for developers. This doesn't mean you can install this on like a super slim, 484 PS3 or anything like that. But yeah, it's interesting to see that it's there. And there's here in the images that they added, there's now a little box there that has, your temps of your CPU and RSX chips, as well as the fan speed, your IP address, how much space you have free on your storage device. And yeah, I think that's ultra convenient, and it's something that I wish they have had there since the beginning, so I might check it out later on. So yeah, Rebug, definitely super solid, stable, and my first choice. And the next two, Habib and Ferrix, definitely I would recommend Habib next. It has the most features after Rebug. If you plan on, using them, then it's definitely a good choice. I think it's pretty much every bit as stable and reliable as Rebug is. Habib has been around for a long time, and I started using his firmware back with 4.60, I think, and I never had any issues with them. Sometimes his would come out before Rebug, so I would use it. There was even a time where Rebug didn't make any firmwares for like a year and a half or 2 years, and so I would use his. I was always pleased with them, and so were a lot of people. if you're going to use a toolbox here, make sure you use his. It is optional to install it, and it will give you access to all of these features here, which I highly recommend. The other thing you can check out here is some of the new features in this Cobra 8.0, which this one has that the other two do not. One of the interesting things here is that the boot time of the PS3 has been greatly improved because there's no stage one that the PS3 has to go through when it boots up. I'm gonna have to check this out to see how much it improves, but that's definitely something that might be worth looking into. The other thing here is that you can run payloads with kernel privileges. Uh, you know, I believe it when Habib says it's a big deal and that it's a big thing. It's kind of like the way it's done on the PS Vita SKPRX, which I don't deal with PS Vita at all. But again, I'm assuming that's a good thing. But I know that right now this is something you are not going to be able to take advantage of immediately, but I'm sure it's going to have its benefits here down the road. Also, expect Rebug to update their Cobra soon in their toolbox to 8.0 because that's always how it works. Shortly after Habib releases his, they will update theirs. So be on the lookout for that. And then we have Ferrix, which is not as feature rich as the other two, and the one that I would recommend after the other two. It doesn't have its own toolbox. You can use the rebug one with it, but it won't have all of the features enabled because it's not rebug firmware. But that's okay. Most people are fine with that because the features that they do want to use are enabled. You can check out some of the stuff here. You know, it's pretty basic, but it doesn't mean it's totally skimped out. If you are not into all that extra stuff and you just want a custom firmware that's just, you know, clean and simple and works, well, this may be for you. You can install your homebrews, your apps, back up your games, all of that stuff, and you should be pretty pleased with it. Even though it's not my first choice, it definitely doesn't mean that it's a bad choice. So with that, let's go ahead and let's wrap up by moving on into some of my tips and hints for installing this stuff. And lastly, here's a few tips that I recommend you do before you install any of these custom firmwares. For those of you who are newer or that just might find this stuff useful, make sure that you disable all spoofers. If you don't, you could ruin your system potentially. In the case of, let's say, Send Enabler, you want to go into Send Enabler, disable PSN access, and then reboot the system. Don't just delete Send Enabler from the XMB. The other thing is you can install any one of these new custom firmwares over any other custom firmware that is 484 or lower. If you are currently on DEX, you can convert. If it's rebug DEX, you can convert back to KEX. So do that first before you install one of these, because these are KEX firmwares, custom firmwares. They're designed to go over another KEX firmware. It's also recommended that if you have an older rebug toolbox, if you plan on installing a new one, if you have an older one that has Webman in it, make sure that feature has been turned off. Also, I recommend, although you don't have to, but I recommend that you turn off Cobra and disable it. Once you've turned off those couple of things, then go ahead and reboot the system. In the first column of the rebug toolbox, you can reboot it from there and do a full reboot. Then you can delete the toolbox from the XMB and install the new one, and then you can install the custom firmware. Also, new custom firmware, when you install it, may cause some apps not to work right or at all, like Webman Mod. So after you install custom firmware, you might notice your Webman Mod might be acting goofy, or it just may not work at all. Just go ahead and reinstall the same version you have there now, or a newer version. Same thing with Multiman. If you find that it's not working right or whatever after the custom firmware update, go ahead and install it again. Also, keep in mind that when you install these custom firmwares, your modified wave, if you've done like a change to the PS3 wave on the XMB, if you've done any changes to the boot up image, boot up sounds, those will all go back to stock, as well as any themes that you have installed. And that's pretty much it, guys. I hope you found this helpful. Again, don't forget to thumbs up and subscribe. And we will see you on the next one. Take care.